20 years ago this week, on March 5th, 2001, Paul Heyman made his surprise debut as the newest member of the Monday Night Raw announce team, sitting next to Jim Ross, just 1 week after Jerry the King Lawler quit the company in protest after his wife, Stacey Carter, was let go. ECW had not run a show in nearly 2 months by that point. That probably would have been that Pine Bluff show they did in early January. And most people, I think, figured the company was probably dead. It was certainly dying at that point. But there was never any formal announcement made about ECW being done. And some of the talent still believed that ECW, because they believed so badly. They were loyal to a fault. They were loyal to Paul. They were loyal to ECW. And they were probably just holding on to false hope. Some of them probably knew deep down that this was the end. But again, nobody had informed the talent of anything official. And so you had people who had put some of their own money, who were owed a lot of money, who were holding out hope that Heyman would find a way to keep ECW afloat. And some of those talents were, again, they're probably watching this, and then they see Paul Heyman pop up as a surprise, unannounced on Raw, and what must be going through their minds at that point? About a month after this, ECW would file for bankruptcy. They listed nearly $9 million worth of debt. They owed a lot of money to a lot of people. They owed as little as $2 to Sabu. They owed up to $50,000 to Joey Styles, $100,000 to Tommy Dreamer, and $150,000 was owed to Rob Van Dam. All of whom I don't believe were ever paid. Now, some of them did go on to get jobs working for WWE, and they probably got paid well there, but I'm not so sure they ever got their money that they were owed. Tommy Dreamer has told the story of getting a 6-figure offer from WCW in the late 90s that he turned down out of loyalty to Paul Heyman. He had put a lot of his own money into the company. The ring truck apparently was in his parents' name. After Paul went to WWE, he told Dreamer that he was going to get him in, and there was a plan for him to debut during that TLC 2 match at WrestleMania X7. He's going to show up, in Houston during the TLC match. Of course, that never happened. He was already very upset after finding out that Heyman was being secretly paid by Vince McMahon for all those years. He had no idea. He had no idea that Heyman was being paid a fee as a consultant fee. I think it was only about $1,000 a week. It wasn't like he was paying him, making him a rich man. But Heyman was secretly being paid by Vince McMahon, and Dreamer had no knowledge of any of this. On his House of Hardcore podcast a few years ago, Dreamer had a startling revelation. I know I covered it on the podcast at that time, but it's a story worth retelling because it is just so shocking. And it's one of those what-if scenarios, like, holy shit, if this had played out, how differently things would be in wrestling. But he said, Paul Heyman, who I thought me and him were super tight, he screwed me over big time. He was in WWE the whole time. I had turned down hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to WCW, and now I was unemployed. I went from a $750,000 offer, which is just, all due respect to Tommy Dreamer, that is just fucking insane, that WCW would offer him anywhere close to that amount of money. I'm assuming that happened, but that is just insane to even think about. But he said, I went from a $750,000 offer, and Paul Heyman crying to me that if I leave ECW, it will go out of business. Meanwhile, he was getting a paycheck from WWE. I don't begrudge him, but then I did. I was depressed as depressed can be. Dreamer was so depressed, he concocted a plan to kill Paul Heyman live on the air at WrestleMania 17, and then turn the gun on himself. He said, at WrestleMania, I was going to hop the rail and whack Paul right in the back of the head at the announce table, and then I was going to whack myself. The ultimate martyr. I was going to hit my pose, crack, boom, pull the trigger. Because I was that insane. First, they would think it was an angle until I shot him. I was so severely depressed and I was so mental with rage, I needed help. That help came from a phone call from Jim Ross, who I think he left a message for Tommy on his voicemail. He said, "Hey, Tommy, it's Jim Ross. Just want to let you know we're still thinking about you. We're still going to get it done. Just hang tight. Thank you." And it is amazing to think how that one phone call may have saved the greatest WrestleMania of all time, what people widely regard anyway as the greatest WrestleMania of all time, from being the most horrific event in wrestling history. That same night on Raw, the Hardy Boys beat the Dudley Boys to become WWF Tag Team Champions, and there was also an infamous segment with Vince McMahon, forcing Trish Stratus to get down on all fours and bark like a dog, then strip down to her bra and panties. They had been romantically linked on TV at the time. She had been humiliated on TV the week before. And she was coming out on Raw tonight, on this evening, to stand up for herself and to stand up and confront Vince McMahon. But when she did, she instead just begged for his forgiveness, which is when he forced her to do all of those horrible things. You know, the idea was to just make this guy, make Vince McMahon out to be the most evil, scummy heel that you could possibly imagine. The problem was, at least in this building on this night, it had the opposite effect in the building in D.C. that night, because all the horny little toads in the audience, they cheered. Each time he would order Trish, he would yell at her to remove a different article of clothing, take off your blouse, take off your skirt, or take off your top. They would cheer louder and louder and louder because you have an audience full of testosterone-filled males. You had a lot of teenagers who were watching the product at the time, and of course they see this unbelievably attractive woman in the ring. What do you think they're going to do? They're going to boo? What did you expect the reaction would be? So, you know, if that might have been what they were going for, but that certainly wasn't the reaction it was getting in the building on that night. He was the biggest babyface in DC. Now, Trish did get her revenge on him during the street fight that Vince had with Shane at WrestleMania. She slapped him in the face. And Zombie Linda, his wife, she was all drugged up in a wheelchair for weeks on TV while he played tonsil hockey with Trish right in front of her. That moment in the WrestleMania match where he picks Linda up, she's again in this zombified, catatonic state, and he sits her on a folding chair, steel chair in the corner, and he makes her watch. He's beating Shane up with a garbage can over and over and over again. And finally he goes, "You watch this," right? He leans in and looks at her, "You watch this." And he turns around and he's going to hit Shane again with the garbage can. And as he raises the garbage can above his head, Linda rises from her chair. And I mean, the whole crowd, you had 68,000 people in the building that night. The whole place just comes unglued. And he realizes something is wrong. And Shane is like pointing, "Hey, you better look behind you." And Vince turns around. And here he sees his wife, who has been, again, catatonic and drugged up now for probably a month, is standing right in front of him. And yeah, he spreads his legs a little bit for the big spot. And she kicks him right in the nuts, right in the grapefruits. And he crumbles down in a heap. That moment ranks up there for me as one of the greatest moments on any WrestleMania show that they have ever done, just based on the reaction it got. And it was built up on television. I mean, the things that he was doing, he was an awful SOB. And so it built nicely, but just the reaction in the building that night that it got, I mean, it was unbelievable. The reaction that got was incredible. So at least we got something good. Something good came out of this in a roundabout kind of way. You know, Ivory, she did a shoot interview. It's actually a lot of fun to watch. You could probably find the different parts of it scattered all over YouTube. But Ivory did a shoot interview, and this was one of the topics that she talked about. And she said, you know, Trish, in the back, Trish was very uncomfortable. She didn't want to do it. She was very uncomfortable doing it. Ivory's opinion on the whole thing was characters on TV. It's a television show, and we're just, playing a part. But she did say that Trish was very uncomfortable about doing it. Look, not the first time, and certainly won't be the last time Vince McMahon makes somebody degrade themselves on television. Let us never forget the Vince McMahon Kiss My Ass Club. Let us also never forget the classic line that we got from Paul Heyman on this very night, his very first night on commentary, as Trish Stratus was about to take her bra off. "Hey, Mom, I came to Washington, D.C., and I'm going to get to see Bush." 12 years ago this week, on March 3rd, 2009, in an interview with the UK Mirror, Mr. T, who along with Cyndi Lauper played a very crucial role in the success of the very first WrestleMania, said that he had rejected an offer to be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. And why did he decline their offer, you might ask? Because of one man, Pete Rose. He said, "WWE asked me to be in the Hall of Fame, and I turned it down. You know why? They put Pete Rose in the Wrestling Hall of Fame. This guy can't even get into his own Hall of Fame. After they put Rose in, they came and asked me, and I said, you don't insult me. You don't put Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame before me. I ain't going to be part of that." They put him in, and he only did one WrestleMania, and he didn't even wrestle. For the record, at that time, Pete Rose had appeared in 3 different WrestleManias. I don't know if he may have made another appearance many years later, but he had appeared in 3 WrestleManias, and he was more entertaining than Mr. T was in either of his. But he had a change of heart. 5 years later, WrestleMania weekend, the first time they went to New Orleans, where he inducted his mother into the Hall of Fame. Or at least you could have fooled me if he didn't. It certainly sounded that way. He used the word mother 73 times during that one Hall of Fame speech. 73 times. Now listen, I have no problem with Mr. T being a mama's boy and expressing love for his mother. I miss my mother every day. I love her with all my heart. Or at least I thought I did until I heard Mr. T's speech. He made me start to doubt myself. It was only one of 2 Hall of Fame speeches. I've been to a whole bunch of Hall of Fame ceremonies. I stopped going a few years ago when a little before I stopped going to WrestleMania. But I just stopped going because it's very hit or miss. A lot of it really does depend on who's being inducted and who's going in. If one of your favorites are being inducted, it might be cool for you to go and just see them and hear the music and just hear them tell stories. But it just got to a point where it was just a total slog and just not a great live viewing experience, something I could go back and watch on TV. I just don't think there should be an audience at the Hall of Fame. I think there have been Hall of Fame speeches that have been hijacked by people who don't know how the fuck to behave at a ceremony like that. You'll have people who say, oh, they paid their ticket, they can say whatever they want. That's true. And if that's the case, then don't sell tickets. Find a different way to monetize it. I would love it if they just stopped having fans altogether at the Hall of Fame. I might get my wish this year, because from what I'm hearing, they might do a virtual Hall of Fame ceremony this year. We'll see if that happens. But it to this day, from all the Hall of Fames that I went to, it is one of only 2 speeches that I ever walked out on live. And they both happened on the same night. The other one was Carlos Colon, because fuck that. But the Mr. T speech, it was not a speech about his experiences in pro wrestling. And Hogan in the first WrestleMania, I mean, if it was very brief. It ended up not being about that. His speech was a tribute to his mother. It had absolutely nothing to do with wrestling, and it went on for so long. They sent Kane out on stage to give him the hook, and it was just a complete train wreck. I felt bad for the guy. I mean, obviously his heart was in the right place. You know, he just wanted to talk about how much his mother meant to him. I know he meant well. And when he realized that he had went long, because they played Kane's music. I mean, actually, the way that they handled it, it was so uncomfortable. He's in the middle of talking. He's clearly nowhere close to being done with his speech. They play Kane's theme music. So, like, he makes an entrance. He comes walking out. He's in his tux. And he doesn't say a word. He comes over to... He actually looked really angry. He comes over to Mr. T. Mr. T turns around and says, "Oh, am I done? Like, have I gone long?" And I think maybe Kane shook his hand and he just walked back. Kane did not look amused by any of this at all. And Mr. T just kept apologizing. He goes, sorry. And he just leaves. It was so uncomfortable. And I felt bad for him. It was just a very uncomfortable moment. But allow me to share, if I may, some excerpts from Mr. T's Hall of Fame induction speech for the WWE Hall of Fame. "I believe that mothers are one of God's greatest creations. My mother, your mother, all mothers. Thank God for mothers. I believe the genius of God's soul expresses himself through the body of a mother, like no other. I wanted my mother to know that I love her every day. Not just on her birthday, not just on Mother's Day, not just on Valentine's Day, not just on Christmas Day, but I loved her on President's Day, on Election Day, on Labor Day, Independence Day, Columbus Day, New Year's Day, St. Patrick's Day, and yes, even on Father's Day. I loved my mother." There it is. I mean, hey, he pretty much named every holiday. Actually, I think he missed one. I think I may have missed one. He also mentioned Flag Day and April Fool's Day. Did I mention those? I think I might have forgotten those too. Flag Day, Groundhog Day, April Fool's Day. He hit pretty much every possible holiday on the calendar. On Twitter, after the show, he was very upset about his speech being cut short, and he promised to release the full text of the speech so that we could all read it. I'm not sure he ever did. I hear that it's still being transcribed to this very day. 8 years ago this week, on March 7th, 2013, WWE fired Eric Pankowski, its head of creative, weeks before WrestleMania. He was this big, celebrated hire for the company when he first came in 1 year earlier, having previously worked at Warner Brothers. It wasn't until October of 2012 that he took over as head writer from Brian Gewirtz. Per PW Insider at that time, the word going around was that he was removed from his position because he was not receptive to ideas beyond his own, and there were incidents where he would get into arguments with wrestlers about what would and wouldn't work on television. He was the one who CM Punk has said suggested Big Show and Daniel Bryan as names who would protect him during his heel run as the champion. Punk suggested, hey, why don't we go with some new faces that people have never seen before, which eventually led to the debut of The Shield. What finally killed him was said to be the Fatal 4-Way he booked for Old School Raw on March 4th with Punk, Randy Orton, Sheamus, and Big Show to determine who would challenge The Undertaker at WrestleMania. To this day, it was the one and only time that they ever had a match to determine who would get the right to go challenge The Undertaker and try to break the streak at WrestleMania. It was a very lazy way of trying to come up with an opponent that year for The Undertaker. Instead of, building a personal issue between Undertaker and whoever the opponent would be, they just had a random match to figure out, who's it going to be? And a lot of people in the company hated the idea, and he pushed it through anyway. And look, Vince McMahon had to approve it because nothing happens on TV without Vince McMahon giving it the green light first. But he may have only done so to give a sort of straw that broke the camel's back cover reason for them to finally get rid of the guy. And if that wasn't why he approved it, and he actually thought it was a good idea, well, it wouldn't be the first time Vince McMahon has blamed other people for the terrible ideas that we see on TV. The boss ain't going to fire himself. They're always going to find a scapegoat. 7 years ago this week, on the March 3rd, 2014 episode of Monday Night Raw, the rematch from their classic at Elimination Chamber between the Shield and the Wyatt family. Seth Rollins walked out on his brothers in the middle of the match, leaving Roman Reigns and Dean Ambrose to fight the good fight 3 against 2. The second straight win for the Wyatts. Not quite the classic their pay-per-view match was, but still very enjoyable. The Shield did eventually win. They did get their elusive win over the Wyatts in their third and final confrontation in April on Main Event. And 4 years ago this week, on March 5th, 2017, not much to say about this one, Bill Goldberg captured the Universal Championship for the first time with a win over Kevin Owens in just 22 seconds. He did go on, though, to have a very good Universal title defense against Brock Lesnar, about 6 minutes long. But I thought they went in there and had a kick-ass match at WrestleMania 33. I actually enjoyed that match a lot more than I did the Kevin Owens match, which went a lot longer, with Chris Jericho. So Goldberg, in my opinion, had the better match than Owens did at WrestleMania when he dropped the belt to Brock Lesnar. And that is this week in wrestling history.